Part 5. I accidentally spoke my thoughts about her butt. Her response was beyond belief. Marcus watched as the Zephyrian delegates moved into their new formation around the conference room. The crystalline structures began to emit different patterns of light, and the musical tones that filled the air shifted to frequencies that seemed to resonate in his bones. Princess Zixara stood at the center of it all, her skin displaying colors that moved like liquid starlight across her form. "Dr. Chen," the princess said, her voice taking on harmonics that seemed to come from the room itself. "This final test will determine whether humans truly possess the aesthetic consciousness necessary to join the galactic community. You must demonstrate that your species can recognize and appreciate pure beauty, divorced from any practical or social considerations." The lights in the room dimmed, and the crystalline structures began to project patterns into the air above them. Marcus found himself looking at three-dimensional displays of light and color that moved and shifted in ways that defied his understanding of physics. The patterns were unlike anything he had ever seen. Not quite geometric, not quite organic, but something entirely new that seemed to exist in more dimensions than his eyes could properly process. "These are examples of what we call essential beauty," Princess Zixara explained. "They represent concepts of aesthetic perfection that exist independently of any physical form or cultural context. Your task is to examine these patterns and explain what you perceive in them. But you must go beyond simple description. You must demonstrate that you can feel and understand the beauty itself, not just observe it." Marcus stared at the shifting patterns, feeling completely out of his depth. How was he supposed to appreciate alien concepts of beauty that had no reference point in human experience? The patterns were certainly impressive, but he had no framework for understanding what made them beautiful according to Zephyrian standards. The first pattern appeared to be based on mathematical relationships that created spiraling forms of light. As Marcus watched, he began to notice that the spirals followed ratios that seemed familiar. The proportions reminded him of growth patterns he had seen in nature. The way shells curved, the arrangement of leaves on a stem, the spiral of galaxies in space. "This pattern," Marcus said slowly, "seems to be based on mathematical relationships that govern natural growth. The ratios create a sense of harmony that feels right, somehow. Even though the visual form is completely alien, the underlying mathematical principles create beauty that transcends species boundaries. It's like seeing the fundamental rules that govern how beautiful things grow and develop throughout the universe." Princess Zixara's skin patterns brightened, but she remained silent as the second pattern replaced the first. This one was more complex, involving colors that shifted through spectrums that human eyes could barely perceive. The pattern seemed to tell a story without words, moving through phases that suggested growth, conflict, resolution, and transformation. Marcus watched the color symphony play out above him, trying to understand what he was seeing. Gradually, he began to recognize emotional patterns in the way the colors moved and changed. The sequence reminded him of human art forms that tried to convey feelings through abstract means, music that told stories through sound, paintings that expressed emotions through color and form. "This pattern speaks to emotions," Marcus said with growing confidence. "It's telling a story about transformation and growth, about overcoming challenges and finding harmony after conflict. The beauty comes from the way it captures universal experiences that any intelligent being can understand. Struggle, hope, achievement, peace. It's like seeing pure emotion made visible." The second pattern faded and the third began to form. This one was the most complex yet, involving layers of meaning that seemed to exist on multiple levels simultaneously. Marcus found himself seeing different things depending on how he focused his attention. Sometimes geometric perfection, sometimes organic growth, sometimes patterns that seemed to represent the flow of time itself. As he watched, Marcus realized that the pattern was designed to engage different types of perception simultaneously. It worked on mathematical, emotional, and intuitive levels all at once, creating a form of beauty that was greater than the sum of its parts. It reminded him of the most profound human art, works that could be appreciated for their technical skill their emotional impact and their deeper philosophical meanings. This final pattern, Marcus said, feeling a sense of wonder that surprised him, is beautiful because it recognizes that true aesthetic appreciation involves the whole being, not just one type of perception. It engages logic, emotion, and intuition together. It's beautiful because it acknowledges the complexity of consciousness itself. Any being capable of truly seeing this pattern would have to possess multiple forms of awareness working in harmony. The patterns faded, and the room returned to its normal lighting. Princess Zixara and her delegation stood in silence for a long moment, their skin patterns cycling through combinations that Marcus could not interpret. Finally, the princess spoke. Dr. Chen, your responses to the essential beauty patterns demonstrate something remarkable. You have shown that humans can indeed perceive and appreciate forms of beauty that exist beyond the boundaries of your own culture and experience. But more than that, your explanations reveal an understanding of why these patterns are beautiful, not just that they please the eye, but why they create the response they do. Marcus felt a surge of relief, but he could sense that the princess had more to say. However, she continued, your success in this trial has revealed something about humanity that we did not expect. Dr. Chen, do you understand what you have actually demonstrated today? Marcus shook his head, unsure what she meant. You have shown us that human aesthetic consciousness is not a mystical gift or a rare talent, the princess explained. It is a natural result of your species' evolutionary development. Your ability to read social cues, to recognize patterns, to appreciate beauty across cultural boundaries. These are not special powers. They are simply what happens when an intelligent species develops through social cooperation and environmental adaptation. Scholar Valera stepped forward. Dr. Chen, when you first made your comment about the princess during our ceremonial dance, you were not displaying some advanced form of aesthetic consciousness. You were simply reacting as any human would to something you found beautiful. Your mistake was in assuming that this reaction was somehow inappropriate or embarrassing. Marcus began to understand where this was leading, but he wasn't sure whether it was good news or bad news for humanity. Princess Zixara walked closer to him, her movements displaying the same grace that had originally caught his attention. Dr. Chen, the truth is that your original comment was not actually an accident. The translation broadcast was certainly unintended, but the sentiment itself was genuine human appreciation for beauty. You saw something that impressed you, and you expressed that appreciation in the direct, honest way that humans naturally do. But I thought, Marcus began, then stopped as the implications hit him. You thought you had made a terrible mistake, the princess finished. But in reality, you had done something that we found far more impressive than any formal diplomatic protocol. You had shown us that humans respond to beauty with immediate honest emotion rather than calculated political responses. Commander Thexanol spoke for the first time since the trial began. Dr. Chen, in 3 centuries of contact with other species, we have never encountered beings who could appreciate our culture so quickly and naturally. Most species require extensive preparation and cultural exchange before they can even begin to understand our aesthetic values. Humans seem to possess an innate ability to recognize and appreciate beauty across species boundaries. Marcus finally began to understand the full scope of what had happened. So my embarrassing comment was actually a demonstration of the exact quality we most value in potential allies, Princess Zixara said with what Marcus was now certain was amusement. The ability to see beyond surface differences and recognize true worth. The courage to express appreciation honestly rather than hiding behind diplomatic formalities. The flexibility to adapt and learn from new experiences. Dr. Sarah Kim, who had been watching the entire trial from the observation area, stepped forward, with the expression of amazement on her face. Marcus, do you realize what this means? They're not just accepting us as allies. They're saying that humans have natural abilities that make us valuable partners in the galactic community. Princess Zixara nodded. Dr. Chen, the Zephyrian Empire would like to propose not just a simple alliance with humanity, but a full cultural exchange program. We want to learn more about how your species developed such remarkable social and aesthetic abilities, and we would like to share our knowledge and technology with beings who can truly appreciate their beauty and complexity. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment. What had started as the most embarrassing mistake of his career had somehow become the foundation for humanity's entry into galactic civilization. "But I have to ask," Marcus said, looking directly at the princess. "That comment I made about..." Part 2. I accidentally spoke my thoughts about her butt. Her response was beyond belief. The silence in the conference room stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Marcus watched in horror as Ambassador Zixara's skin patterns continued to shift through colors he had never seen before. The other Zephyrians had formed a tight circle around their leader, their own skin displaying patterns that looked distinctly aggressive to Marcus's untrained eyes. Captain Rodriguez was the first to break the terrible silence. His voice was strained, but professional as he stepped forward. "Ambassador Zixara, I deeply apologize for Dr. Chen's inappropriate comment. He clearly made an error with his translation device, and his words do not represent the views or intentions of humanity or this diplomatic mission." The ambassador raised one elegant hand to silence the captain. Her eyes never left Marcus's face as she spoke. "Captain Rodriguez, we require time to consider what has just occurred. This meeting is suspended until further notice." Without another word, the Zephyrian delegation filed out of the conference room with the same fluid grace they had displayed during their entrance. The sound of their departure seemed to echo through the ship like a death knell for human ambitions in space. As soon as the aliens were gone, the remaining humans erupted into barely controlled panic. Ambassador Clark immediately activated her secure communication link to Earth. Dr. Williams began frantically checking the translation records to see if there was any way to claim a technical malfunction. Captain Rodriguez paced the length of the conference room like a caged animal. Dr. Sarah Kim walked over to Marcus, who was still standing frozen in the same spot where he had delivered his career-ending comment. "Marcus," she said gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Are you okay?" Marcus finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Sarah, I think I just ended humanity's future in space. How could I be so stupid? I checked the translator 3 times before the meeting. I was sure it was set to private mode." Sarah pulled out her portable scanner and ran it over Marcus's neural translator. The device beeped several times before displaying its results. "Marcus, look at this. Your translator was set to private mode when you entered the room, but there's a log here showing that it switched to broadcast mode exactly 37 minutes into the meeting. That's right when the Zephyrians began their ceremonial dance." Captain Rodriguez stopped pacing and hurried over to examine Sarah's findings. "Are you saying the translator malfunctioned?" "Not exactly," Sarah replied, studying the data more carefully. "It looks like it received an external signal that overrode the privacy settings. The Zephyrians might have some kind of technology that automatically opens communication channels during their cultural ceremonies." Marcus felt a tiny spark of hope, but it was quickly crushed by the reality of the situation. Even if it was a technical issue, what I said was still completely inappropriate. I insulted their ambassador during a sacred ritual. There's no way they'll forgive something like that. Ambassador Clark finished her communication with Earth and turned to address the group. Her face was grim. "I've informed the United Earth government of the situation. They're sending emergency instructions, but it will take several hours for their response to reach us. In the meantime, we need to figure out how to salvage this disaster." Dr. Williams looked up from his translation analysis. "I've been reviewing the exact words that were transmitted. The Zephyrian translation is even worse than we thought. In their language, Marcus's comment roughly translates to something like, 'I declare aesthetic dominance recognition over the sacred movement form.' I have no idea what that means in their culture, but it sounds ominous." The next few hours passed in a blur of frantic activity. The human team tried every approach they could think of to contact the Zephyrian delegation and apologize for the incident. Their communications were ignored. The aliens had sealed themselves in their quarters and refused to respond to any attempts at contact. Marcus spent the time writing what he was sure would be his final report as a diplomat. He took full responsibility for the disaster and recommended that Earth send a completely new negotiation team if the Zephyrians were willing to give humanity another chance. He also composed a personal message to Ambassador Zixara, praising the beauty and grace of her people's culture and begging forgiveness for his unintentional disrespect. As the ship's day cycle moved toward evening, Captain Rodriguez called an emergency meeting of the entire diplomatic team. "I've received new orders from Earth," he announced. "If we can't resolve this situation within the next 24 hours, we're to return home immediately. The government doesn't want to risk making things worse by staying here too long." The team discussed various strategies for approaching the Zephyrians, but every idea seemed hopeless. How could they explain that Marcus's comment was an accident, when it had been delivered during such a culturally sensitive moment? How could they convince the aliens that humans were worthy of respect, when their first impression had been so disastrous? Just as the meeting was about to conclude, the ship's communication system activated. Lieutenant Johnson's voice came through, the speakers with obvious excitement. "Captain, we're receiving a communication request from the Zephyrian vessel. Ambassador Zixara is asking to speak directly with Dr. Chen." Marcus felt his stomach drop. This was it. The ambassador was probably going to formally reject humanity's application to join the galactic community and possibly declare them enemies of the Zephyrian Empire. He had single-handedly destroyed his species' future with one thoughtless comment. "Patch the communication through to the main conference room," Captain Rodriguez ordered. "Dr. Chen, are you ready for this?" Marcus straightened his uniform and tried to compose himself. "As ready as I can be for the end of my career and possibly human civilization." The large viewing screen activated, displaying Ambassador Zixara in what appeared to be her private quarters aboard the Zephyrian ship. She was alone, which Marcus thought was probably a bad sign. Her skin patterns had changed again and were now displaying a steady golden color that he had never seen in any of the research materials. "Dr. Chen," she said, and her voice seemed different somehow, less formal and more curious. "We need to discuss what happened during our meeting today." Marcus took a deep breath and prepared to deliver the most important apology of his life. "Ambassador Zixara, I want to express my deepest apologies for my inappropriate comment during your ceremonial dance. My words were completely unacceptable, and I take full responsibility for this diplomatic disaster. I understand if your people can never forgive such disrespect, but I want you to know that my comment in no way reflects the feelings of humanity toward your noble civilization." The ambassador listened to his entire apology without interruption. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment, studying his face through the communication link. Finally, she spoke. "Dr. Chen, your words today have created a situation that has not occurred in our society for over 3 centuries. We have spent many hours consulting our ancestral codes and historical records to understand the implications of what you said." Marcus braced himself for the worst. "I understand, Ambassador. Whatever punishment you deem appropriate, I will accept it willingly." "Punishment?" The ambassador's skin patterns shifted slightly, taking on what might have been an amused quality. "Dr. Chen, I think there has been a significant misunderstanding about what occurred today. Your comment was not an insult to our people. According to our most ancient traditions, what you said was actually a formal declaration of courtship intent." The conference room fell silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. Marcus felt like his brain had stopped working entirely. "I'm sorry, what?" Ambassador Zixara's skin patterns were now displaying colors that definitely seemed amused. "Your species' mating customs are intriguing, Dr. Chen. In our culture, the ability to recognize and boldly declare aesthetic superiority during a sacred ceremony is considered the highest form of intelligence and artistic appreciation. Such declarations have not been made to members of our royal family for many generations." "Royal family?" Marcus managed to croak out. "Yes, Dr. Chen. I am Crown Princess Zixara of the Zephyrian Empire, and according to our laws, Your declaration today means that you have formally requested to court me according to the ancient traditions of our people." Marcus stared at the screen in complete shock. Around him, he could hear the sharp intakes of breath from his colleagues as they processed this impossible information. Captain Rodriguez looked like he might faint. Dr. Kim was frantically taking notes as if documenting this moment for future historians. However, the ambassador continued, and Marcus's heart sank again. "Before such a courtship can proceed, you must prove that your species possesses the advanced aesthetic consciousness that your declaration implies. Tomorrow you will be required to evaluate our entire delegation and demonstrate the sophisticated, artistic judgment that humans apparently possess." The communication link went dark, leaving the human team sitting in stunned silence. Marcus realized that instead of ending humanity's diplomatic future, his embarrassing mistake had. Part 3. I accidentally spoke my thoughts about her butt. Her response was beyond belief. Marcus spent the entire night pacing his small cabin, unable to sleep despite the exhaustion that weighed down his entire body. The revelation that Ambassador Zixara was actually Crown Princess Zixara of the Zephyrian Empire had changed everything about their situation. What had started as a simple diplomatic disaster had now become something far more complex and dangerous. Dr. Sarah Kim had been working through the night as well, frantically researching every piece of information they had about Zephyrian culture. She appeared at Marcus's door just after dawn, carrying a portable computer loaded with data files and looking like she hadn't slept at all. "Marcus, we need to talk," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "I've been analyzing everything we know about Zephyrian society, and I think I understand what happened yesterday. But the situation is much more complicated than we realized." Marcus sat down heavily and rubbed his tired eyes. "How much worse can it get, Sarah? I accidentally proposed to alien royalty. I'm pretty sure that's the peak of diplomatic disasters." "That's just it," Sarah said, pulling up files on her computer screen. "You didn't just propose to her. According to the historical records I found in our databases, what you did was invoke something called the Trial of Aesthetic Mastery. It's an ancient Zephyrian custom that hasn't been used in over 300 years. She turned the screen toward Marcus, showing him translated documents that the advance team had gathered during the preliminary negotiations. "Look at this. The trial was originally designed to test whether potential mates of the royal family possessed what they called the divine sight, the ability to perceive true beauty and worth in all its forms." Marcus studied the information, feeling his stomach sink lower with each line he read. "So when I made that comment about the princess, I accidentally triggered some kind of ancient test?" "Exactly. And here's the really important part. If you fail this trial, it's not just considered a personal rejection. According to their laws, failure would mean that humanity as a whole lacks the aesthetic consciousness necessary to join civilized galactic society. They could declare our entire species culturally inferior and ban us from ever contacting them again." The weight of responsibility settled on Marcus's shoulders like a physical burden. Not only had his mistake put him in an impossible situation, but the future of human civilization now depended on his ability to convince aliens that he possessed some kind of mystical artistic sense that he definitely did not have. A soft chime indicated an incoming communication. Captain Rodriguez's voice came through the intercom. "Dr. Chen, please report to the main conference room immediately. The Zephyrian delegation is ready to begin the evaluation ceremony." Marcus and Sarah made their way through the corridors of the ship, passing crew members who looked at them with expressions of hope and worry. Word of the situation had spread throughout the vessel, and everyone understood what was at stake. The future of humanity's place in the galaxy rested on Marcus's performance in the next few hours. The conference room had been transformed overnight. The Zephyrians had installed strange crystalline structures that filled the space with soft, colored light. Musical tones that seemed to come from the air itself created an otherworldly atmosphere. 5 ornate chairs had been placed in a semicircle, clearly intended for the Zephyrian delegation. Princess Zixara entered first, and Marcus was struck once again by her incredible presence. In the special lighting, her iridescent skin seemed to glow with an inner fire. Her movements were precise and graceful as she took her position at the center of the semicircle. The other 4 members of her delegation followed, each taking their designated seats. "Dr. Chen," the princess said, her voice carrying easily through the modified acoustics of the room. "Today you will demonstrate the aesthetic consciousness that your species claims to possess. You will evaluate each member of our delegation and explain what you perceive about their nature, their role in our society, and their personal qualities. Your ability to see beyond surface appearances will determine whether humans are worthy of joining the galactic community." Marcus felt his mouth go dry. He had no idea how he was supposed to evaluate alien beings according to standards he didn't understand. Everything he knew about Zephyrian culture came from second-hand reports and brief communications. How could he possibly judge their aesthetic qualities or guess their social roles? The first delegate stood and moved to the center of the room. He was tall, even by Zephyrian standards, with skin that displayed geometric patterns in silver and blue. His movements were sharp and precise, like a soldier or warrior. Marcus decided to trust his instincts and describe what he observed. "This individual displays patterns that suggest discipline and structure," Marcus began, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "His bearing indicates someone accustomed to command and responsibility. The precision of his movements suggests military training or similar preparation. I would guess he holds a position related to defense or security within your society." Princess Zixara's skin pattern shifted to what Marcus hoped was an approving color. "Commander Thexnall is indeed the head of our Imperial Guard. Your observation shows promise, Dr. Chen. Continue." The second delegate was smaller and moved with a different kind of grace. Her skin displayed flowing patterns that seemed to change constantly, like water or wind. When she gestured, her movement seemed to tell a story without words. Marcus watched her carefully, trying to understand what made her unique. "This person's patterns suggest creativity and communication," he said. "The way she moves indicates someone who is comfortable expressing ideas and emotions. Her gestures seem designed to convey meaning beyond simple physical movement. I believe she might be involved in arts, education, or diplomatic communication. Scholar Valera serves as our chief cultural historian and communications specialist," the princess confirmed. "Your assessment demonstrates unexpected insight." As Marcus continued evaluating each delegate, he began to notice something interesting. His years of studying human body language and social behavior were helping him read the Zephyrians in ways he hadn't expected. The way they held themselves, their movement patterns, and even their skin color changes seemed to follow rules that were similar to human social cues, just expressed in alien ways. The third delegate moved like a dancer, with flowing motions that seemed to follow invisible rhythms. Marcus guessed correctly that she was involved in artistic performance. The fourth delegate's movements were careful and precise in a different way from the military commander, suggesting someone who worked with delicate or complex materials. Marcus correctly identified him as a master craftsman and engineer. With each successful evaluation, Princess Zixara's skin patterns became brighter and more complex. The other delegates seemed increasingly impressed by Marcus's ability to understand their roles and personalities. But Marcus knew the real test was still coming. The princess had saved herself for last, and she would be the most difficult to evaluate correctly. Princess Zixara stood and moved to the center of the room. Her presence immediately dominated the space in ways that the others had not. Her skin displayed patterns that were far more complex and beautiful than any Marcus had seen before. Colors shifted through combinations that seemed impossible, creating designs that were both alien and somehow familiar. But it wasn't just her physical beauty that set her apart. The way she moved indicated someone who was accustomed to being the center of attention, but not in a vain or selfish way. Her gestures suggested someone who carried great responsibility and was comfortable with the weight of leadership. The deference shown by the other delegates confirmed what Marcus had already suspected. "Princess," Marcus said, and he saw her skin patterns react to his use of her correct title. "Your evaluation is the most complex because you embody multiple roles simultaneously. You are clearly a leader, as evidenced by the respect shown by your companions and the natural authority in your bearing. But you are also a diplomat, as shown by your willingness to engage with unknown species like humanity. Marcus paused, studying her more carefully. There was something else about her movements and expressions that spoke of deeper qualities. But beyond your official roles, I sense someone who values knowledge and understanding above simple power. Your willingness to participate in this trial suggests someone who believes in giving others fair chances to prove themselves. You are not just royalty. You are someone who takes responsibility for the welfare of others seriously. The princess's skin patterns exploded into a display of colors that seemed to fill the entire room with light. The other delegates made sounds that Marcus interpreted as expressions of amazement or approval. When the light show finally subsided, Princess Zixara was looking at him with an expression that seemed both surprised and pleased. "Dr. Chen," she said, and her voice carried undertones that he had never heard before. "Your evaluation demonstrates a level of perceptive ability that we did not expect from your species. You have not only correctly identified our roles and positions, but you have shown understanding." Part 4. I accidentally spoke my thoughts about her butt. Her response was beyond belief. Marcus stood in the center of the transformed conference room, feeling the weight of 5 alien gazes focused entirely on him. Princess Zixara's question hung in the air like a challenge that could determine the fate of his entire species. She wanted to know the source of human aesthetic consciousness, and Marcus knew he had to find a way to explain ordinary human abilities in terms that would satisfy her expectations. He took a deep breath and decided that honesty, carefully presented, might be his best approach. "Princess, to understand human aesthetic consciousness, you must first understand how my species evolved and developed on our world." Marcus began walking slowly around the room as he spoke, using movement to help organize his thoughts. Humans evolved as what we call persistence hunters. Unlike many predators that rely on speed or strength for short bursts, humans developed the ability to track prey over vast distances and long periods of time. This required us to become extremely good at reading subtle signs and understanding patterns that others might miss. Princess Zixara's skin patterns shifted to colors that suggested interest. The other delegates leaned forward slightly, clearly engaged by his explanation. "But humans did not hunt alone," Marcus continued. "We evolved as social creatures who lived in complex groups. Survival depended not just on hunting ability, but on understanding the intentions, emotions, and capabilities of other humans. We learned to read body language, facial expressions, and behavioral patterns because our lives depended on knowing who could be trusted, who was strong, who was clever, and who might be dangerous." Commander Thexnall made a sound that might have been approval. Marcus took this as encouragement to continue. "Over thousands of generations, these survival skills became part of our basic nature. Modern humans can observe another being for just a few minutes and make accurate guesses about their personality, their role in society, their emotional state, and their capabilities. We do this automatically without even thinking about it. What you call aesthetic consciousness, we simply consider normal human observation." Scholar Valera spoke for the first time during the evaluation. "But Dr. Chen, this does not explain your ability to appreciate beauty and artistic expression. Survival skills alone would not account for the sophisticated judgment you have demonstrated." Marcus smiled, feeling more confident as he warmed to his subject. "That's where another aspect of human evolution becomes important. Because we lived in social groups, humans who could create and appreciate beauty had advantages in finding mates and forming alliances. Art, music, storytelling, and physical attractiveness all became ways that humans demonstrated their intelligence, creativity, and genetic fitness." He gestured toward the crystalline structures that the Zephyrians had installed in the room. "When I look at your ceremonial decorations, I can appreciate their beauty because my brain is constantly analyzing patterns, symmetries, and harmonies. When I watch your movements, I can recognize grace and skill because humans have always valued those qualities in ourselves and others." Princess Zixara stood and walked closer to Marcus, her movements displaying the same graceful precision that had originally caught his attention. "You suggest that human aesthetic consciousness developed as a survival mechanism rather than a mystical gift?" "Exactly," Marcus replied. But that doesn't make it less real or less valuable. In fact, I would argue that it makes it more impressive. Humans developed these abilities through millions of years of evolution and thousands of generations of social development. Every human carries this capacity for observation and appreciation, refined by countless ancestors who survived because they could read situations and people accurately. The princess circled him slowly, her skin patterns cycling through combinations that Marcus was beginning to recognize as deep thought. This explanation suggests that all humans possess these abilities, not just selected individuals like yourself. Marcus nodded enthusiastically. That's correct. What you've seen from me today isn't special or unique among my people. Any human diplomat, scientist, or even ordinary citizen could have made similar observations about your delegation. We might use different words or focus on different details, but the basic ability to read character and appreciate beauty is universal among humans. Commander Thexnall stood and addressed the princess directly. Your Highness, if this is true, then humans represent a species with naturally developed perceptive abilities rather than individuals with rare gifts. This could have significant implications for potential alliance considerations. Scholar Velaira was taking notes on a device that seemed to record information directly from her thoughts. The social evolution model would explain many of the unusual characteristics we have observed in human communications. Their diplomatic messages showed remarkable ability to adapt their language and concepts to our cultural framework, even with limited information about our society. Marcus realized that his explanation was having an unexpected effect. Instead of diminishing human capabilities in the aliens' eyes, it was actually enhancing their assessment of his species. The Zephyrians seemed impressed by the idea that evolution had naturally produced beings with advanced social and aesthetic abilities. Princess Ixara returned to her position facing Marcus directly. Dr. Chen, your explanation raises an important question. If all humans possess these abilities, how do we know that your evaluation today was genuine rather than simply educated, guessing based on your diplomatic training? This was the moment Marcus had been dreading. He needed to prove that his assessments had been based on real observation rather than lucky guesses. But how could he demonstrate something that even he wasn't entirely sure he understood? Princess, may I make a suggestion? Marcus said, hoping he wasn't about to make another terrible mistake. Allow me to tell you things about each member of your delegation that I could not have known from our briefing materials or diplomatic reports. If I can accurately describe personal characteristics that were not included in any official communications, it will prove that my observations were based on direct perception rather than prior knowledge. The princess exchanged glances with her delegation before nodding. Very well, proceed. Marcus turned to Commander Thexnall first. Commander, you carry yourself like a professional soldier, but there's something else about your movements that suggests artistic training. I believe you have experience with some form of combat that is considered an art form in your society, possibly something similar to what humans call martial arts or dance fighting. The commander's skin pattern shifted to what Marcus hoped was surprise. I am indeed a master of Velthara, the traditional warrior's dance of our people. This information was not included in any of our official communications with humanity. Marcus felt a surge of confidence. His guess had been based on the way the Abbas commander moved with precision that went beyond simple military training, suggesting someone who had learned to make fighting into a form of artistic expression. He turned to Scholar Velaira next. Scholar, your work with communication and history has given you personal experience with many different cultures, but I sense that you have a special interest in species that are very different from Zephyrians. You study aliens not just professionally, but because you are genuinely curious about how different forms of life think and feel. Scholar Velaira made sounds that Marcus interpreted as amazement. Dr. Chen, my private research focuses specifically on non-telepathic species and how they develop complex societies without the mental connections that Zephyrians take for granted. This research was not mentioned in any of our diplomatic preparations. Marcus continued through the other delegates, describing personal interests and characteristics that he had inferred from subtle behavioral cues. With each successful observation, the Zephyrians seemed more impressed by human perceptive abilities. Finally, he turned back to Princess Zixara. Princess, you asked me to prove that human aesthetic consciousness is real, rather than educated guessing. But there's something about you that I've observed that goes beyond your official role as a diplomat and royal leader. The princess's skin pattern stilled, displaying solid colors that suggested complete attention. Continue. You didn't just come on this mission to evaluate humanity as potential allies, Marcus said, choosing his words carefully. You came because you were personally curious about our species. Something about human behavior or culture caught your attention in our preliminary communications, and you wanted to see for yourself whether we were truly different from other species you've encountered. The princess was quiet for a long moment, her skin cycling through colors that Marcus couldn't interpret. Finally, she spoke. Dr. Chen, you are correct. In 3 centuries of diplomatic contact with dozens of species, we have never encountered beings who could adapt their communication styles so effectively with so little information about our culture. I requested to lead this mission personally because I wanted to understand how humans achieve such flexibility in their thinking. Marcus felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had successfully demonstrated that human observational abilities were both real and valuable, but he could sense that the trial was still not. Dr. Marcus Chen stood in front of the mirror in his small cabin aboard the diplomatic vessel Harmony's Edge, adjusting his formal uniform for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. His hands shook slightly as he smoothed down the dark blue fabric. Today was the day that would either make history or destroy his career completely. The first official meeting between humanity and the Zephyrian Empire was about to begin in less than an hour. Marcus had spent the last 6 months preparing for this moment. He knew everything there was to know about Zephyrian biology, culture, and social customs from the limited data Earth scientists had gathered. The Zephyrians were an ancient race that had ruled a significant portion of the galaxy for thousands of years. They were known for their incredible physical beauty, their complex social structures, and their telepathic abilities that made them extremely sensitive to thoughts and emotions. The pressure on Marcus was enormous. As the lead xenobiologist and cultural attaché for this mission, he was responsible for making sure nothing went wrong during the first contact protocols. One mistake could end humanity's chance of joining the galactic community. Earth desperately needed the advanced technology and trade opportunities that an alliance with the Zephyrians could provide. Captain Rodriguez had briefed the entire diplomatic team multiple times about the importance of this meeting. The Zephyrians had agreed to this face-to-face encounter only after months of careful negotiations through subspace communications. They were naturally suspicious of new species and had destroyed civilizations in the past for what they considered cultural violations or disrespect. Marcus checked his neural translator one more time. The small device implanted behind his ear would automatically translate his words into the Zephyrian language and vice versa. The technology was still new and sometimes had glitches, but it was their only hope of meaningful communication. He made sure the device was set to private mode, so his thoughts wouldn't be accidentally broadcast to anyone else. The door chime sounded, and Dr. Sarah Kim entered his cabin. She was the expedition's xenoanthropologist and had become Marcus's closest friend during the long journey to the meeting point near the galactic border. Sarah looked as nervous as Marcus felt, but she managed a reassuring smile. "Ready for the most important day in human history?" she asked, trying to sound cheerful, despite the obvious tension in her voice. Marcus laughed nervously. "I've been ready for months. I know their customs, their language patterns, their social hierarchies. I've memorized every piece of information we have about them. But I still feel like I'm about to walk into a room full of gods who might decide to vaporize me if I use the wrong fork." Sarah nodded understandingly. "The whole crew is nervous. Captain Rodriguez has been pacing the bridge all morning. But remember, they agreed to this meeting because they're curious about us too. We must have something that interests them or they wouldn't have bothered." The 2 scientists made their way through the corridors of the ship toward the main conference room. The Harmony's Edge was humanity's most advanced diplomatic vessel, designed specifically for first contact situations. It had taken the combined resources of 12 nations to build and equip the ship for this mission. As they walked, Marcus reviewed the basic facts about the Zephyrians in his mind. They were tall, typically around 7 feet in height, with naturally athletic builds that spoke of evolutionary perfection. Their skin had a subtle iridescent quality that could shift colors based on their emotions and social status. They valued physical prowess, artistic beauty, and intellectual achievement above all else. Their society was built around complex hierarchies that were determined by a combination of genetic heritage, personal accomplishments, and aesthetic qualities. The conference room had been specially prepared for the meeting. Human and Zephyrian seating arrangements had been carefully planned according to diplomatic protocols. The lighting had been adjusted to accommodate both species' visual needs. Everything had to be perfect. Marcus and Sarah took their positions near the large viewing screen that would display the Zephyrian delegation when they arrived. The other members of the human team were already in place. Captain Rodriguez stood at the head of the table, looking every inch the professional military officer. Dr. Williams, the linguist, sat with his hands folded calmly, though Marcus could see the tension in his shoulders. Ambassador Clark, humanity's most experienced diplomat, reviewed her notes one final time. The comm system crackled to life. "Zephyrian vessel approaching," announced the voice of Lieutenant Johnson from the bridge. "They're requesting permission to come aboard." Captain Rodriguez straightened his uniform. "Permission granted. All hands prepare for our guests." Marcus felt his heart rate increase as the minutes passed. The sound of the airlock cycling echoed through the ship's corridors. Heavy footsteps approached the conference room, accompanied by a strange musical humming that must have been Zephyrian voices. The doors to the conference room slid open, and Marcus got his first look at a living Zephyrian. He had seen images and videos from the preliminary communications, but nothing had prepared him for the reality of their presence. The lead figure was clearly female, based on the briefings he had studied. She stood nearly 7.5 feet, tall, with a graceful build that seemed to combine strength and elegance in ways that human anatomy couldn't match. Her skin was a pale silver color, with subtle patterns that shifted like ripples on water. Her features were sharp and angular, but undeniably beautiful according to any standard Marcus could imagine. She wore a flowing garment that seemed to be made of some kind of living material that moved independently of her body. Her hair was long and white, but it seemed to have its own internal light that created a soft glow around her head. Behind her came 4 other Zephyrians, each impressive in their own way. They moved with a fluid grace that made human movement seem clumsy. By comparison, their eyes were large and multifaceted, like jewels that contained depths Marcus couldn't fathom. Captain Rodriguez stepped forward and began the formal greeting that had been rehearsed dozens of times. "On behalf of humanity and the United Earth Government, I welcome you aboard the Harmony's Edge. I am Captain Rodriguez, and these are my colleagues who will represent our species in these historic negotiations." The lead Zephyrian inclined her head in a gesture that somehow managed to convey both respect and superiority. When she spoke, her voice was like music with undertones that seemed to resonate in Marcus's bones. "I am Ambassador Zixara of the Zephyrian Empire. We come to evaluate your species and determine if you are worthy of joining the galactic community. We have traveled far to see if humans possess the qualities necessary for peaceful coexistence with our people." The formal introductions continued as each human team member was presented to the Zephyrian delegation. Marcus watched Ambassador Zixara carefully, trying to read her expressions and body language for any signs of approval or disapproval. The future of humanity might depend on making a good impression on this alien dignitary. When his turn came, Marcus stepped forward and bowed in the manner that their research had indicated was appropriate. "I am Dr. Marcus Chen, xenobiologist and cultural attaché. It is an honor to meet representatives of such an advanced and noble civilization." Ambassador Zixara studied him with those impossibly deep eyes. Marcus felt as though she was looking directly into his soul and measuring everything she found there. The intensity of her gaze made him nervous in ways he hadn't expected. "Dr. Chen," she said, and her pronunciation of his name was perfect despite the vast differences in their vocal anatomy. "We are curious about your species' understanding of beauty and aesthetic appreciation. Your communications have suggested that humans have interesting perspectives on these matters. Marcus nodded, trying to project confidence he didn't entirely feel. Humans have always valued beauty in many forms. Art, music, literature, and the natural world all hold special meaning for us. We believe that aesthetic appreciation is one of the qualities that separates intelligent life from mere existence. The ambassador's skin patterns shifted slightly, taking on warmer tones that Marcus hoped indicated approval. She gestured gracefully with one long-fingered hand, and the other Zephyrians moved into what was clearly a ceremonial formation. "We will now perform the traditional greeting of our people," Zixara announced. "This will help us understand how your species responds to our cultural expressions." What happened next was unlike anything Marcus had ever witnessed. The 5 Zephyrians began to move in perfect synchronization, their bodies flowing through poses that seemed to combine dance, martial arts, and some form of artistic expression that had no human equivalent. Their movements were hypnotically beautiful, displaying the full range of their physical capabilities and grace. Ambassador Zixara was clearly the focus of the performance. Her movements were the most complex and beautiful, showcasing not just physical ability, but an artistic sensibility that spoke of centuries of cultural refinement. The way she moved was poetry written in motion, each gesture perfect and meaningful. Marcus found himself completely mesmerized by the display. The ambassador's form was unlike anything he had ever seen, combining alien beauty with a physical perfectio.